So first of all, I guess a good question to ask is kink-friendly hypnosis erotic hypnosis? Because that's something that I get asked a lot. Oh, you do all that erotic hypnosis, and erotic hypnosis is fun, but kink-friendly hypnosis is therapy, and there's a very big difference between the two things. Kink-friendly hypnotherapy often has nothing to do with sex. It's about the people that we're working with and their lifestyles, and not judging them. So it's an important differentiation where the erotic hypnosis tends to be non-therapeutic, and hypnosis often has a sexual nature or sexual element, even if it's just giving somebody a hypnotic sensation or an orgasm. So the two things are very different. Let's have a look here. So, what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to play you something that, I'll wait till they're quiet.
What on earth?
Just so you can, I just want you to get a grip of what the kind of client is that I deal with, and the kind of, the reason why we need to have kink-aware, kink-friendly hypnotherapists.
Get us to start chanting.
Okay, so we'll shout really loud. All right, so I'm going to play this. Luckily, I had the foresight to actually transpose it. So as you listen to it, apart from anything else, I just thought you might not understand the British accent that was on there. But here we go. All right, so so this is one of my clients. This was just last week, describing what it was like to have a therapist that wasn't kink-friendly.
Hi, my experiences with mental health therapists are
I pressed the wrong button there. There we go.
as such that my last NHS therapist, who was supposed to be doing CBT with me, when I told her I was into BDSM and kink stuff, basically she looked at me like I'd grown another head, that I was some sort of major freak. She said that I basically had to totally cut out huge aspects of my...
There we go, just bear with me.
personality in order for her to say that I was getting better. So that I basically had to stop being a submissive and doing anything in the lifestyle, otherwise I wouldn't ever get well. Basically it really made me feel like a total utter loser and freak. As if something was fundamentally wrong with me. Before that I had a therapist who was a self-harm therapist, who, when I tried to explain aspects of my personality that I was into kink, also said that I had to give it up, otherwise I'd never get over from my self-harming. Understanding is that most of them don't seem to understand that it's a major aspect of my personality and just can't get over it. And basically it makes me feel really wrong.
Can you imagine going for therapy and being made to feel like that? I mean, and this is really common, and it's not that, these therapists are bad people, they're just very much misinformed. But to be, if you've gone for help with something, whatever that may be, and then you're told that, parts of your aspects of your personality that are often completely irrelevant to the reason why you've gone for therapy, and if you don't do all of that, they're strong suggestions. As therapists, you'll never get better, and I can't, this is just really the tip of the iceberg. So the question that I'm asking people, and I'm out there asking a lot of therapists this now, is, are you kink friendly or are you kink phobic? And most people would say, oh no, I'm very open-minded and we're very aware. you know, I'm very friendly towards these people. But actually, you know, the survey shows, the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom showed that 45% of people that were practicing kink that had gone to find access for therapy had actually been discriminated against by a therapist. So that, you know, that's a high number of people, you know, and that's a lot of people feeling really, you know, being made to feel not great about themselves. Now, 50 Shades, of course, has kind of increased awareness of things like BDSM and kink, but it's also increased misunderstanding. You know, if you go and speak to anybody within the BDSM community, they will tell you that that relationship that's been portrayed in those books, those films, is a very abusive relationship. Even though it may have opened things up more for other people, it's actually not a realistic portrayal of what that lifestyle is like. Okay. Clients of mine that have come to see me later have been told that they are perverted and sick, that they will never get better unless they admitted they had been abused or they were being abused by their partner, that they would never lead a productive life. I mean, they're some statements to be told, aren't they, you know, if you're going to try out to sort your anxiety or something. That they are being abused by their partner and they didn't know it, that their partner must be sociopathic, psychopathic, and lots more. But what's really interesting, because I do stand up and I shout about this and I talk about it, I personally have been told as a kink-friendly therapist, so this is as a therapist, that I am bringing hypnosis into disrepute, that there is no place in hypnosis for someone like me, and that I should be very concerned what people think about me and the assumptions that they will make. And I say, and you're a therapist. You know, these are the things that we're, you know, generally trying to make sure that, you know, we're helping people with, not worrying about what other people think, self-acceptance, all of those kinds of things, having an open mind. So, you know, I just laugh and generally show them, honestly, there we go, and generally show them this. Sorry, the Orleans Wi-Fi has just suddenly decided to connect, or trying to connect. Here we go. So I show them this, which I found, which, you know, doesn't mention hypnosis on there, but I thought was quite relevant. You know, I just kind of keep banging this up at people when they start giving me a hard time about it, which basically says, you know, we're not supposed to, you know, get treatment now if you're a therapist that's judging people like that, because, you know, we say we'll do no harm. You know, we're not supposed to be judging people. And maybe it's them suffering from a psychological disorder or addiction based on your moralistic, outdated, unsubstantiated, harmful beliefs about kink, which probably they haven't actually researched. So, there we go. So, kink, BDSM, you know, all these kinds of things have actually been around for a very long time. I'm quite recently back from a holiday in Italy, and while I was there, I visited Pompeii and Herculaneum, in which all of these practices have been around. They're all documented, you know, that people used to do these things. It was really open, it was accepted, it was a normal part of sexuality. And then something happened along the way. Religion, that's the one. So, but you know, it's been around for as long as sex has. What also happened was the DSM, which I'm sure, you know, it's helpful in some reasons, but in most things it's not. The new version has actually depathologicalized a lot of the paraphilias, but really a lot of the kink community are where the gay community were 40 years ago. So, you know, it's a very similar kind of scenario that we're seeing now with the kink community. Interestingly, do you know how the DSM came about? Do you all know how that kind of appeared? Okay. So this manual that, you know, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists have, you know, used as their Bible. Basically what happened back in the day, about 50 psychiatrists and psychologists got together in a conference suite, a bit like this, sat down and went, right, okay, so we're going to make this thing called anxiety disorder. What are the symptoms of anxiety disorder? And basically, every mental health diagnosis that we have has been made up. There isn't a single test, a proper biological test for any mental kind of disorder or diagnoses. So when we think about that, that's why each time that manual is reviewed, it's kind of updated alongside current thinking. So at one point, homosexuality was a mental disorder. Now that's been taken out. So now the paraphilias have been taken out. Unfortunately, a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists haven't actually caught up with that new thinking within the DSM. So it's just worth knowing when people say, in the DSM I've been diagnosed as, this time in the DSM, there's something called bereavement disorder, which is basically you're upset and sad when somebody has died. Is that a mental disorder, or is that a normal reaction to life? But there we go. Okay. But it's crazy, isn't it? So, you know, I kind of say what we need to have, you know, if we're going to have an opinion about whether or not we want to work with something, we have to be informed. And we have to be informed, we have to go and do our research, and we have to learn. So, you know, that kind of cultural competence and knowledge that all therapists should have, really, is an accepting and non-judgmental attitude. So we can't bring our own beliefs into the therapy room. Knowledge about alternative sexual practices and values, I think that is really important, because if you're going to call abuse on somebody, you need to understand what is abuse and what isn't. You need to understand what consent is and what it isn't. And they need to understand the people, the demographic that you're working with. I think we have to refuse to pathologicalise alternative forms of sexual expression. Hopefully, in 2017, we're getting to a point where, you know, people can be much more expressive within a consenting kind of arrangement. And, you know, this idea, you know, we see this all the time. My speciality is working with sexual dysfunctions, and the majority of those are brought on about guilt and shame. It's guilt and shame that drive those things. And that if we're then told that what we think we want to do with our partner, or what we're doing with our husband, or what we just have fantasies about, is, you know, makes us feel wrong, and, you know, is told that, you know, we won't get better if we don't let go of those, and it's a natural, normal part of us, then there's no hope, really, is there? So we need to change this around. We need to be sensitive to kind of sexual minority issues, and we need to take the responsibility to educate ourselves as hypnotists, as therapists, and actually just as people here, you know, who are part of the human race. Now, any questions so far? If you disagree with me, shout. I'll happily, Okay. So, in terms of kink clients, BDSM clients that come for therapy, either related to their lifestyle or completely separate, but they just want to be kind of open and honest about who they are, which obviously makes therapy work better, doesn't it? If you don't feel like you're hiding anything away. You know, the one other thing that they kind of, so the kink-phobic therapist would say to me is, oh, you know, well, you know, they're very unstable, very mentally unstable people, they've got lots and lots of issues, they've all been abused, you know, all these kinds of things. And actually, when you go and look at the evidence, what you find is that within the kink community, there is no greater history of past abuse or trauma than in any other community. You know, this is a big, a big assumption that's often made within the BDSM community, that all these people have been abused, and actually the majority of them haven't, and certainly no more than in the general population. People within the kink community actually tend to have a higher level of self-esteem and are healthier than average. So, you know, it's not a self-esteem thing usually after. When people talk about it's because they've got low self-esteem that they allow people to do these things to them, or they want to do these things to other people. And they're usually highly skilled in communication, imagination, and self-awareness. And when we think about what we're actually trying to do, the fact that they've come, you know, these are great people to work with in therapy, because they're already halfway there. You know, they know what they want and what they need. What is consensual BDSM and what is abuse? So actually, you know, we were talking about this yesterday when I was teaching the pre-conference workshop, but, you know, BDSM tends to be very, very controlled. And the person that is kind of doing whatever they're doing to the other person has normally had training in what they're doing. It's a skill set that's built up. There are classes, there's all kinds of things that people do. It's normally negotiated. So these people sit down and they really talk about what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what's going to happen during that particular scene, what the outcomes they want to be, what the safe words are, what hopes and needs and desires are. It's a very, very negotiated thing with very strict boundaries, hard limits, all set there. Knowledge and consent is given by all parties, and that consent can be withdrawn at any point during the whole process as well. It can be stopped. I think that's a big thing. You know, the safe word is there. If it's used, everything stops. It just stops. There's no negotiation about that. It just does. Needs, limits, desires are a primary concern. Is very rarely mixed with drugs or alcohol, and at the end of it, everybody's feeling good, everybody's got what they've wanted, it's all nice and wonderful. If you look at abuse, it's the total opposite to that. So you've got a very uncontrolled environment. There's no negotiation, and certainly the person that's on the receiving end of it has not given consent, or it's not even been asked for. It can't be stopped. The person that's kind of on the receiving end of it has no power to stop it at all, and there's no concerns about needs, wants, desires. It's not about a shared experience, it's abuse. Often related to drugs and alcohol, and people, including the person that's done it, will often feel really bad afterwards. Now, when I look at this and I see how the BDSM kink community work, and then I look at abuse, I actually see much more abusive relationships in my office from the vanilla community than I've ever done from the BDSM community. And actually, I think that the vanilla community could learn a lot from how the BDSM community operate in terms of their relationships, negotiations, respect, all those kinds of things. I think actually we should maybe be looking towards that model of consent than the one that we seem to accept. And we see this, we see abuse going on all the time in the vanilla world, and we don't do very much about it. So this is quite an interesting one in terms of what we see as healthy accepted behaviours and, you know, similarities to some of the BDSM behaviours. And this is just something that, you know, I kind of made a few observations, and it's about attitude and mindset of people. It is human nature to seek excitement, to seek adrenaline, to seek novelty. But if you look at, say, something like shibari, which is a very ancient art of bondage, of tying somebody up in a very beautiful way, it's done very respectfully, you know, lots of knots, it's done in a very sensual way. And then you look at bungee jumping, where somebody is, you know, kind of wrapped up in a tight harness and then hurled, possibly to their death, off the top of a hotel. That's okay, but the shibari is all a bit weird, and why would you want to do that, man? You know? Role play, you know, I have clients that like to, you know, as part of their kind of persona, they like to be kittens or bears, or, you know, they like to play, you know, do out sexual role play, try out new things within, you know, I come from England, we have like reenactments of battles and people hitting each other with swords and all kinds of things going on. That's
we have
fine.
that here too.
Yeah, that's fine, but the role play in the bedroom, not so fine, you know, it's interesting. Body marking, you know, people enjoy that. They like, you know, they like to, when they're doing something in a sexual way, or maybe they've been spanked or something, there's a mark that's left there that's temporary. Yet we live in a world where I'm sure there's people in this room that have tattoos, ask them about their tattoos. Oh, it's an amazing feeling when somebody's rubbing ink into your skin with a needle, but that's fine, and the other one isn't. And so on and so forth. And it's just... And then, you know, sensory play, all different kinds of sensory play, and then, you know, people will go and have a massage, and it's wonderful. And, you know, it's just about what's been accepted as the social norm and what has been sexualized, and then, of course, religion has kind of taught us that, you know, being sexual is bad, you know. The one thing that, you know, every one of us in this room couldn't possibly be here without two people having had sex, and yet it's still shrouded in all this shame and guilt and all the rest of it, and sexual expression certainly so. Okay. So this is a question that I'm often asked, well, you know, when does it become a problem? You know, when does this kind of lifestyle and things become a problem? You know, and really, the thing that I see the most is things like fetishes. And that's when, you know, fetishes, lots of people have them, they don't cause any problems, we can indulge ourselves in them, they're a lot of fun. But it's when somebody gets to the point where it's the only way they can become sexually aroused. So it has to be there, otherwise they can't. So they can have everything else, but if one thing is missing, then, you know, nothing happens for them. Now that's obviously then becomes quite life limiting, doesn't it, you know? That then starts to cause issues within relationships. And that actually, from the kink community, in terms of a sexual thing, is the most common thing that I would see. And really, you know, a sexual fetish is excitement. It's not necessarily actually sexual excitement, but it's excitement, it's that buzz in response to an object or body part that's not typically sexual. So the classic ones would be feet, hair, noses, leather is another one, you know, all of those kinds of things. And you know, most of us are quite sensory people. Most of us like the way particular things feel. It's just moved on a bit. So, I'm kind of done this so we've got some time for some questions and discussion at the end. But, you know, I always say when somebody, you know, especially when I get told that I'm bringing hypnosis into disrepute and there's no place in hypnosis for somebody like me, I kind of think the opposite, that actually as hypnotists, we need to be out there. We're in the business of expanding the mind. We're in the business of accepting people. We're in the business of helping people to be the best possible versions of themselves. And, you know, whether you're kinky or not, whether you're, you know, it shouldn't really come into it. It should just be part of that. But I would say to therapists that are kink phobic, you know, and I point out to them that they are, that actually in itself isn't a crime, you know. People have phobias, people, you know, have misunderstandings about things. None of us are perfect. But judging clients based on a therapist's beliefs is a crime. And actually, therapists being unwilling to accept that they have kink phobia, I think, is a very, very dangerous thing. So it's not about whether you're kink phobic or not, it's about whether or not you know you are. And if you know you are, and you're happy being like that, then that's absolutely fine. But then refer on, you know. Don't make somebody feel bad because of, you know, their set of beliefs. And this is the thing that I'm really trying to get out there, is that we need to kind of expand this, that, you know, we need to be talking about these issues. We need to be talking about different kinds of sexual expression. And it needs not to be shrouded in all this shame and guilt and worrying about what other people will think, you know, especially as hypnotists. I mean, goodness sake, we're hypnotists. If we worried really about what other people thought, we wouldn't be hypnotists, right? So you know, that's kind of where I am. And it's that first do no harm. So, you know, right across the board, whether it's with kink clients or not, we should be asking about, if we've got a judgment or we've got an opinion about something, we need to make sure that that's coming from a very good place and not a place of something that we've learned that's maybe been misinformed. All right, so what I'm going to do now, it's always the way. There we go. Is to say thank you and just kind of open this up a bit for discussion, because actually it's the conversation that needs to happen.
This is a question about legality. It's really two parts. One, has the law in the UK eased up on BDSM? Because wasn't it very restricted in the past?
In terms of, what do you mean by the law on BDSM? The law on abuse?
I thought it was not allowed, period, in the UK, that activity.
That's not something I've ever heard.
Okay. And then the next question is, do you do your work as a hypnotist alone, or are you a licensed mental health worker, psychologist, or psychiatrist?
I'm not a psychiatrist and I'm not a psychologist. I am a registered clinical hypnotherapist,
Right.
so in the UK. So that's how I do my work.
So for some of us here in the US, this work could present a potential problem. if we are not licensed in somewhere.
Okay, so I guess that would be, if you're not licensed in somewhere in the US, that's state dependent, isn't it?
That's right, state to state.
Okay, so I guess, you know, it's one of those things, it's what you're looking at, isn't it, in terms
Yes.
of, yeah.
Okay, just on that point, you can't take the national health insurance, is that right, for treatment?
So we have the national health in the UK, we have the NHS.
Do you get paid for them?
Occasionally.
Okay, so that's the distinction, okay? So you need to be licensed clinician in one of those fields of psychology or medicine to get paid through insurance.
Okay.
And so that's the other,
But I
In
guess
certain
you've got-
states.
but that's the other
But-
thing that's so freeing for me is, I don't take any insurance, I don't need to, people pay me cash.
I was going to say, this is the thing really, you know, I guess that there may be areas that in America that you can't, according to those laws, but I guess even within that, those therapists still need to be aware of this, don't they,
Sure.
whether the ones that are there, so, you know, yeah.
To return to this gentleman's point, I have a PhD in clinical psychology, practiced for nearly 30 years. I dropped my license because it gave me much more freedom in the type of client I was able to work with and what I was able to do. Now, I'm out there. I give trainings all over the US, Europe, Southeast Asia, and I've never been harassed by authorities in any way, either because of my private work or because of my teachings. I think there's a lot of fear that some ambitious prosecutor up for re-election is going to find or something like that.
But you see, this is how this is how, you know, we've got to this place in the first place, isn't it? It's about fear. Fear of what other people will think, fear of, you know, being seen to be something that's not within the social norm, isn't it? And actually, that's right, isn't it? You know, you're not the first person that said, do you know what? I just dropped my license because of that. And, you know, we look at all these rules and regulations, and I'm not suggesting that we don't need to be aware of those rules and regulations, but we need to challenge some of these kind of thoughts and feelings, don't we?
If nothing else, you will end up with a client base that includes law enforcement,
Absolutely.
judges,
Funny.
senior administration officials.
Yeah, it's funny. Oh, the other thing I found, on that line is that I really got known in the news community, you know, what do they call it? Clothing optional community.
Yeah.
And I got so many, I was like a niche for me that just happened because they're a close community. They said, well, that guy is good. And he helped me,
Yeah,
and there was
I mean,
no
you're absolutely right. By working in this area, what you get is a niche area, isn't it? So, and you know, if you go into Google and you Google kink friendly, kink aware, kink knowledgeable therapist or hypnotherapist, certainly hypnotherapist, there's very few of us in the world that do that, you know. And this is the thing, you know, I have clients globally, you know, Skype is, this is the other thing as well, you know. I get, interestingly, the majority of my clients from America are from the southern states of America, and even though there are people that, you know, are quite willing and able to do this kind of work, it's this fear that they're going to get found out. It's the fear that if somebody finds out that on a Saturday night that, you know, they're like being tied up by the partner, that they're going to lose their job as a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, this is how bad this is. And, you know, this is crazy. This is a crazy state of affairs.
You had mentioned the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom. It's like $100 to join, and then you can register as a kink,
Yeah,
kink aware
therapist. Yeah, they check you
There's
out.
an
They're pretty
additional
good.
charge for that, but I don't think it's much. When
Yeah.
I just joined, it was $100.
And the Sexual Freedom Hypnosis, we are now an organisational member of the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom. So it is. It's to join that. It's just $100 to join.
I think back to the question of the fear around how we practice. As long as we all, state by state, stay within the scope of our field, we can do what we need to do with this community and any community. And it's all the language, because we don't treat, diagnose, or cure. You know, I had that drilled into me as a biofeedback specialist for 8 years. you learn to adapt your language, and we don't, and you don't need to cure them of their thing, and they're usually not coming in because of that, they're coming in because of, I'm self-harming, okay, so then we work within that parameter,
That's exactly right. They're coming in because they don't want to be judged. So, you know, in the same way, I might get, what they would call themselves a kinkster who wants to stop smoking, but also wants to be really open about their life so that they can do that, and they're not hiding something. Again, you're going to get better results from your therapy if people aren't having to feel that they're having to hide something away because you're going to negatively judge them as their therapist, because that, you know, when you think about therapeutic rapport, you're already starting on the back foot if that's the case, really, isn't it? Absolutely.
I'm actually aware of some cases in Minnesota states where adult children of child abuse at the hands of their parents will not go to a professional and disclose it and the help they need because they know that licensed people are mandatory reporters and they don't want to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
So they will seek out a hypnotist because they're unlicensed and they're not mandatory reporters.
Depends on the state, because I am.
Yeah, it does depend on the state.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? That, you know, people are actively seeking out people that aren't licensed because they're mandatory. This is the thing, isn't it? You know, and it's that client confidentiality as well, isn't it? You know. So yeah.
Getting back to what they were talking about earlier, on the flip side, with the client, what can we do? You might speak on this. What can we do to alleviate fears of them? Like, you know, like, would they come in thinking like, oh, they're going to try to cure us?
Okay. So in terms of being a kink-friendly therapist, in the terms of asking what the client wants, so that they don't think we're going to try and cure them of their affliction of kink.
Well, no, even before that, just to get them in the door, to assure them before they even walk in that you're safe here.
Okay. This is where you kind of have to assure them that you're safe here, you have to, that has to be done before they've even made first contact. And this is why you can, as a kink-aware, kink-friendly, kink-knowledgeable therapist, or even working with sex, really worry about what other people think, because that, for me, is out there on my website. This is what I do, this is what this means. This means that you won't be judged. It means that I don't think there's anything wrong with what you're doing. You know, this is about therapy that's non-judgmental. So they've got that. They're kind of searching for, it's a standard thing now to search for a kink-friendly therapist. In fact, going back to the National Coalition, they actually have a huge list of kink-friendly professionals, which includes things like plumbers, lawyers, dentists, you know, right across the board, anything you need, just so that you're not getting judged by people.
If I can make another suggestion, go to where your clients already are.
Yeah.
Okay, so go show up to lunches, go to play parties, go to clubs, go to resorts, okay? I think once they find out that you're a hypnotist, they're like, oh, can you do me?
Right.
I go to, I do exactly that. I go and give demonstrations at fetish nights and fetish clubs, and actually just go and mingle. Which actually very actively shows that you're not judgmental, doesn't it? You know, you're kind of out there and you can just go and talk about these things. You had a question?
I mean, we went through what the definition of kink is and the definition of phobics to kink. What if somebody's been indoctrinated by society, so they come in and say, oh, I've got a foot fetish, can you get me over it? And as you talk to them, it's within boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you just say you're normal and send them away, or if they want to get rid of it, do you help them get rid of it? You know, if they've been hypnotized to be phobic.
So are we talking, so if somebody comes along with a fetish that they're saying they want to get rid of, are we talking a fetish in the sense that we're talking about a fetish that...
Well, say a foot fetish.
Okay.
So I come in and say,
so if it's a true kind of paraphilia, where it's the only way that they can get rid of that, or it's the only way that can get aroused is by, you know, by feet.
We're talking about the
I've got
person
my feet
that's-
here, can't remember the name of my feet. If that's the case, then obviously that's the reason why they'll often come is for that therapy.
Yeah.
But I find that most people worry that there's something wrong with them, that, you know, they've got
Yes.
this awful affliction, that they think these things and they have these fantasies and they do these things and they really like it, and that must mean that they, you know, they struggle with that. That's actually where self-acceptance kind of comes in, isn't it, you know? And it's also about education, because most people think they're the only person that has this. You know, they're the only person, even though they can go and Google it, you know, when I say to them, well, you're not the first person that I've seen that has a foot fetish, you know, and I point out to them sometimes, you know, it's strange that there are parts of the body that we accept that everybody might find sexual or sexually attractive, and yet, you know, if it's an earlobe or the back of a knee, then that somehow is weird, and that actually isn't, is it? So, you know, unless it's having a major negative impact, I would normally go down the route of self-acceptance and just integrating it more into that personality. Right, is there any one? Yeah?
There's a standard therapy question when they're talking about whatever, reporting problem or things with problem. Ask them, what does that allow you to have or have more of? It's a way of chunking up, and they'll report back the type of pleasure that they receive from it, for example. And when they're doing it, they're expressing it in a self-loathing kind of way. You can tell that is damaging to them. I don't have to make a judgment about it. If they say, oh my God, they say, I'm transported to the heights of ecstasy, well, we all need more of that, and so it's not actually.
But you're right, it's kind of about how they're feeling about, you know, whether it's there's the self-loathing there or it's an ecstasy thing. But at the same time, it's also about, you know, we do have to work within the realms of the law. So this is where, you know, if we understand what abuse is and what it isn't, if we understand what consent is and what it isn't, then, you know, hopefully we're educating our clients that way as well. All right, I think pretty much it's 1:45, so I'll leave it there.